We have too much information. And if you're not the type of mind that has the ability to reflect and download and digest, right, these ideas so that you can think for self, then all this information becomes just fast consumption, like fast food. It's never been this complex on the planet Earth. It was always more simple in different times because
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I'd like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got on another brilliant guest. I'm very excited to have this conversation with him. He is a thought leader, he's an entrepreneur, he is a futurist, and this is 19 Keys. Welcome to the show, man.
man, I appreciate you having me here. Thank you. Absolutely. It's an honor.
Awesome, man. First question that I need to get to, because I'm sure some people in my audience are going to be wondering this right now, and that is, what does 19 Keys mean?
19 keys is a representation of a frequency of truth, right? It comes from a quote by a man named Masterful Arthur Muhammad in the early 1930s. He said there's 17 million original people and there's 2 million Indians. And he said that represents the 19 million rusty locks. And he said there's 19 million well-oiled keys to unlocking those rusty locked minds. Keys being an interchangeable word for knowledge, right? Or enlightenment and the energy that one can gain in order to have that light in the mind and never be oppressed again. But then at number 19 is a 19 that represents all, everything that exists between that 1 through 9, from the macro to the micro. And so for me, I took on the moniker of 19 Keys, and I always say I'm not 19 Keys, I represent 19 Keys, right? This idea of enlightenment and truth, right? And ever since then, it was more so about how can I unlock my fellow person so that they can become a high level observer like myself or a high level thinker like myself. And so I've been on that journey of producing high level observers in the world, right? As a thought leader, as a futurist, that's the way I see the world. I see micro and macro shifts, right? I study economics, I study science, I study technology. I've been doing this over the last 10 years and particularly been trying to make sure that my culture is caught up, especially as the shifts and changes start to happen, so that we're not reacting, right? We know how to properly respond because we're well trained and we're well aware of what's to come. And in a quantum AI age, right, we are now in this space and time that we're supposed to be prepared for. So more people are starting to listen to the message because those keys, right, are starting to unlock those chambers within self to say, okay, I see what Keys was talking about, right? And so anytime I get a concept that makes you think, that's a key, right? Because I believe a thinking man is a free man.
I love that. How did you get into this world? Tell me about your background.
It was my beautiful parents that brought me here. I had nothing to do with that. But I come from Oakland, California. I was born in St. Louis. We moved when we was one. And so I was raised in Oakland. And in Oakland is where I say I got more of my, consciousness, more of a militant consciousness, if you will, growing up at a all black Muslim school, right? And the founder was a black militant, if you will. He also owned early in that area. They owned what they call Your Black Muslim Bakery, which is these bakeries that were ordained and to be opened by an honorable Elijah Muhammad at that time because he wanted to show that there was something that we owned, right? For ourselves. You got to remember, this is when it first opened, I believe it's like 60s, 70s. So even this was a health food bakery. Everything was designed based on his teachings of how to eat to live. And How to Eat to Live is a book that is monumentally ahead of its time, right? That came out as one of the first teachers, right, of health in the black community, teaching us what to eat and what not to eat. He was actually one of the first teachers of Dr. Sebi. Dr. Sebi credits him as one of the first people to care about black people's health in America. And so this book, this um, bakery would be a place that would have gluten-free and fresh bakery foods and things of that nature and vegan foods and tofu and all of those things. This is early before the idea of veganism became popular. But this bakery also doubled as like a headquarters, right, at night to where they would have meetings and they would have training, right, for the men. And so I would go into this environment called FOI evenings or meetings rather which means fruit of Islam. It's a name given to the military branch of the Nation of Islam. So early, all the young men, right, would go in there and we would learn how to drill, get military training for the discipline of mind, right? We would have business meetings, right? So we would have to sit there, even though I'm young, I don't really care about this stuff at the time, right? But I'm sitting there learning, business and then also the discipline. And then what happens when you're not doing business right? Because there will be some disciplinary actions for the men who were in these meetings and they weren't doing correct things on whether they was on post because they would also have a security company. So you would get these reports and they'd be like, all right, this brother didn't do right. He fell asleep on the post. Then they would have to bring up, explain your actions. And then sometimes this person would get trouble and things of that nature. Right. So it was this whole entire paradigm that I grew up with, seeing black men with money, business, power, influence, right? Militancy, respect, right? So for me, I always say like I don't look to the past to see like Black Wall Street as an example. I grew up in
Mhm.
an example, right? That I want to reproduce on this earth because I look at progress as ownership. I look at progress as power, not symbolism of, a cultural moment that makes you feel good.
If you're a fan of dystopian fiction and sci fi thrillers, then you should check out Lucid, a new novel by writer Michael S. Milano. Lucid is a 21st century blend of 1984 and Brave New World, set during a devastating pandemic. The year is 2084, and the Pansophical Corporation protects what's left of humanity from the deadly Timbaku virus and a terrorist organization known as Praxis. After losing his wife to the pandemic and being assaulted by public safety for violating curfew, citizen Anthony Sartori begins to have bizarre flashbacks. In a culture dominated by suspicion, asking the wrong questions could put him in the crosshairs, but Anthony is determined to uncover the truth no matter the cost. Lucid is an exciting and timely read that cautions against collectivism, technological surveillance, and sacrificing freedom for the illusion of safety. If that's up your alley, go to lucidthebook.com and grab yourself a copy today. That's LUCID, thebook.com to get yourself a copy. Free to be safe, safe to be free. lucidthebook.com. There's a word you've used there a lot of times, which is militant. And what does that mean?
I think, well, in this particular context, it means exactly what it says as far as militants of a military minded person, somebody who is involved in something bigger than themselves, a part of an army of an idea at the same time, somebody who goes through training and discipline of the mind. You have to learn to become a good follower before you can ever become a good leader, right? And so even growing up when I was younger, we used to do militant drills, right? If you ever was in school, you went to ROTC and things of that nature, then you can understand that. And the thing about militancy for young boys, it breaks you out this bubble of this imaginary world, right? A lot of young men today live in a Peter Pan syndrome where they live in a fantasy world about their potential, but they don't have the willfulness or the discipline to actually execute and go get things done, right? I didn't have that privilege being younger because I grew up in a militant household, right? Where everything was by the book. You feel me? Like we would learn how to be security minded from a very young age and take care of ourselves, and we would learn about the realities of the world and what we would need to do in order to be able to secure ourselves and sustain ourselves, right? There will be grown men coming in there teaching lessons on martial defense or mental capabilities and things of that nature. It was a vast variety of things that would happen there, but real militant in the sense that we would have to drill all throughout Oakland. So we would hop out in these demonstrations, line up like you see in the Malcolm X movie, right? And we would line up and everybody would be in suits. This could be smack dead in the middle of the summer while it's hot outside. But also because we ate right, we didn't oversweat, right? But the point of it was to show a demonstration to the streets, right? That this is another way, right? So we would hop out in the middle of the hood and the mothers would have their sons watch, like, see, this is how you could be. You know what I'm saying? And then
Mm.
sometimes they would have them join the ranks to learn. And then other grown men would come in because they were looking for a job. But in order to get a job, you would have to submit and you would have to learn what we call general orders, right? You would have to uh, um, learn these so that you would get the discipline of the organization, right? And so that you will become a part of something that's bigger to yourself so that you would leave some of these individual egoistic ideas and you would become part of this group thinking, right? I believe that every young man should go through some sort of militant training and or discipline because it becomes a rites of passage that prepares you, right, to be a part of the world. And it makes you more willful because you do things that you don't like. And when you do things that you don't like, it actually increases your willfulness, right? So a lot of people they get caught in their feelings. I don't feel like doing it. In the military, I don't care about your feelings. You gotta get this done. You feel me? So it ain't about what you like, it's about what's necessary. And that when you're younger, you hate it, right? When you get older, you appreciate the hell out of it. You feel me? You appreciate all of it because it teaches you so many small things that are life skills later on in life. And when you go to jobs, right, they appreciate a mindset of a young man that's more disciplined and know how to move and things of that nature and say yes, sir, and no, sir, right? Yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and that's respectful and know how to correctly follow orders, but then also learning how to think for self. You feel me? Which was a big key as well. So yeah, I credit growing up early in that environment, going through a private school that was Black Muslim, which taught us based on our aptitude levels, right, and not based on the government's curriculum, right, which allowed me to grow and develop my mind. There were so many lived experiences that I have that are different than the average person, right? Not only just that, growing up in Oakland, right, being in the ghettos at the same time. So you go to a Muslim school and then you in the streets. So in our environment, the children did not understand that idea, right? That you just came from this militant Muslim paradigm environment. Because then we'd be right back and with the other kids, but our behavior would be a little different. You feel me? Because we had a different level of consciousness about the world and about self, but we still children. Then growing up in St. Louis, which was a whole nother one, that was the first time I ever went to public school. So I learned that dynamic of seeing like these little freaky kids was wild. It was completely different. They was managed as hell. I'm like, damn, it was a culture shock. You feel me? So growing up in St. Louis is where I got more of my street mentality. You feel me? Because growing up there, that was the first time I remember going to school and we had riots at school and people was getting shot at school and they were selling weed and crack and it was a very bad school. It's called Roosevelt High School. It ended up getting cleaned up later on. Remind me of the movie Lean on Me. It was that bad. And then, having jobs, having hustles, going to jail, getting in trouble, having court cases, being in those court cases, going to school, being a dropout, going to corporate, learning that, starting my own businesses. I wore more different hats than the average man, right?
Mm.
I've been in environments seeing my uncle smoke crack right in front of me. You feel me? And then later end up dying on the railroad tracks. You feel me? Like I've been in a variety of situations that the average man hasn't, which allows me to see in all these different lens of views. You feel me? And then my natural interest of science when I'm young, popular mechanic magazines and technology, right? And things of that nature is what naturally led me to be more of a futurist, to think about what's to come instead of what's here, because we was taught about the fall of America. But I always think, okay, well, if their America falls, then that means our America rises, right? And so, what does our America look like? And so, if you look at an example of like a Shenzhen, China, you can see where they went from rice fields to become developed in a technological age and create millionaires and billionaires. And that's because they focus on fields of education, right, of technology and data analysts and coding and AI. And now they're in the most in demand fields and they was able to build their world up based on that. And I seen that vision for us as well as a people to say, damn, if we can get our education right, then we can build our own parallel world.
Tell me a little bit more about your parents, because it sounds like they are not the norm. It sounds like the way that they raised you and your background, talking about your schooling, all of that. Your parents sound like very interesting people. So tell me more about mom and dad.
My mom was the school teacher. She actually taught at the school and an herbalist. She converted to Islam with my father, right? So my mother was in the Nation of Islam when my father was in this group at the bakery was kind of an offset sect of Muslims, right? So they were more paramilitary. Sometimes they carried guns and things of that nature, and it was more focused on business. and things of that nature. So you have these two different versions where Nation of Islam is, I would say, more peaceful, and they're more so about maintaining the cultural righteousness of Islam in America, right? Building black families and things of that nature. And so this group at the bakery, they were more progressive in business ideology and entrepreneurship, right? And this will to power. And so my mother, she installed all of the values and ideas in us about who we were and how to become solutions in the world. Because anytime I complain about something that I see in a nation or I see a debate girl, I see in the world, she'd be like, well, be the solution then, right? She would never let me continue a thought of complaint. She would always cut me off. And my mother, I always call her like the oracle. You know what I mean? If I'm Neo, she the oracle. She'd give me the right advice. I didn't always listen, but I knew it was right because when I didn't listen, her voice in my head would be like, I told you so. So, my mother, man, is one of the sweetest people you ever meet. She had 10 children, you know what I'm
Oh
saying,
wow.
through her and my father. And I have 7 brothers or 6 brothers all together. It's 6 of us, 2 sisters. One passed away, right, at birth. So and my father wasn't always there. He'd be in and out sometime, a man of the movement and then a man of the street sometime. But I learned from him, not even just directly, I learned from him indirectly a lot by watching him. And I watched how other men respected him. My father's somebody you consider to be a general. You know what I'm saying? He was the one that other men respected, and he was a man's man, and he led other men, right? He was the captain of this organization over there at the bakery. And so I seen him at his highest, I seen him at his lowest, right? I learned a lot from him through in that way, that indirect way, because he wasn't a man that would always sit down with you through soft love and nurture you and teach you in that matter. He would do things in front of you that he knew you would possibly pick up, right? And so, me being a very observant child, I would observe my father ways, mannerisms, but more specifically, how other people reacted to him, the respect he got, the way he moved in the room, the way everybody moved around him, right? The way he spoke to people, sometimes being softly and not needing to be extra tough, but he still always got his way, right? And there was a level of fear and respect at the same time. There was this dynamic I always seen. And he knew how to handle situations, right, when he got into it. And so for me, it was that observation of my father that, number one, I learned him as a human being, right? Because him and my mother ended up divorcing, and I learned to see both of them as people versus being my parents. So it allowed me to forgive whatever human flaws that came into that. So their divorce never hit me hard, right? Because I seen the humanity in them, and then I just respected them as a woman and a man before being my mother and my father, right? And so that dynamic, I think, healed a lot of um, things that possibly even some of my siblings didn't get over to later on, right? So I didn't have to go through that whole era of blaming things on my parents. You feel me? I just appreciated what they gave me, and then I took the best parts and I moved forward on.
I'm curious to talk a little bit about the current state of masculinity. I feel like this is a conversation that's been rising more and more over the past decade, and everyone has some sort of take or angle on it. I think gender relations in general are in a really strange and interesting place. Maybe they always have been since the beginning of time.
The idea of this crisis of masculinity is very real. The question becomes is whose version of masculinity, right? Because everybody has an idea on what masculinity should or shouldn't be. And then when you think about the idea of it being defined perfectly, can you ever define it perfectly? Right? And perhaps that's no. Perhaps there's always a cultural idea of what masculinity is. Right? And so we're looking at it from a Western hemisphere perspective, right? Then we look at it from a core root. So let's start from its core root. The values of masculinity, right? A man that is intellectual is masculine, number one. Intellectual man has the ability to solve his problems without violence. because he can utilize his intellect, right? So in hypermasculine, you think about one that becomes violent, but that's because they lack the intellect, so they go straight to the aggression, right? They go into the reptilian mind versus that neocortex, that higher thinking, right? So when man evolved, yes, there was a time where you may have been more aggressive because that was the region of the brain that you had to solve problems and protect and do things, right? But when man developed that neocortex, right now you have higher reasoning skills and you have critical thinking and you can create philosophies and you can think more high level of strategies to resolve this. That doesn't deal with us actually coming to combat, right? So I was taught that war is more of a feminine principle, right?
Mm.
Versus masculinity is more intellect, right? Because it is solving a problem before you have to get to that point to where now we have to disperse this energy and we have to violently aggress each other. So when I think about manhood from a intellectual standpoint, then man is mine,
Mm.
right? So when you talk about someone that is masculine, that's when his mind is aligned, right? That is when you have control over the faculties of self, right? You have self awareness, you have self discipline, you have self knowledge, right? Think about the ultimate man in the world. It's not the brute, right? It's not the one that is the biggest in the physical strength, right? The men who rule the world are the men of intellectual strength, intellectual power, right? So even if we was to say from a hierarchy standpoint of where we are in present day, look at the presidents, right? They're not muscular. Look at the world leaders, the kings. These are all men of intellect, right? Thinkers, strategic. So it's funny because we act like the ideas of masculinity have never disappeared. They always exist in the rulers and the archetypes of the leaders and those that we remember on this planet because they represent the exceptional qualities of a man, right? We
Mm.
look at the Malcolm X's and the Marcus Garveys and the Huey P. Newtons and the Nelson Mandelas and the Gandhis and all throughout the world, the Kwame Turis, what they have in common is this intellect, right? And so they have a level of dignity and discipline, right? Grit and resilience, right? It's the value structure that one is built upon that develops your masculinity, right? And that allows you to have that level of discipline and control over the most dangerous thing that you have, which is a mind.
Mm.
But this mind can do terrible things, but it can do great things. And so if you look at like Japanese culture, they have the Bushido. And in the Bushido, they believe that a man should know the art of war and the art of peace. We're often taught the art of war in America, but we don't put enough value on the art of peace. So man is this duality of balance, right? Always being in control of self, having access to darkness and access to light. What often happens is a man has more access to one than the other, and so they control you more, right? A man that has too much light, right? He may not be a great protector. He may have the heart to do it, but a woman may not like him because they call you a nice guy.
Mm.
Oh, you a nice guy. Why do nice guys finish last? Because they let everybody else go first. The riddle is solved by the question itself. So if you letting everybody else go first because you so goddamn nice, then yeah, now it's y'all you align with your woman. Like, damn, why you let them go before us? You don't respect yourself enough to stand in your position, right? So now she don't feel like you are the person that can protect her. You don't have the status and the quality, right?
Mm.
You don't, when you look at it, what happens is you got the dark triad, right? The Machiavellianism, right? Where you go get it by any means, no matter who in your way. That's the American capitalist mindset, right? The shrewd capitalist, very brutalist way of thinking. Then you have, of course, the narcissist. Everything is just about me. You know what I'm saying? But the narcissists know how to go get some power and they're very ambitious, right? So they end up being successful in America because everybody's a narcissist to a degree, right? So when people say I'm not a narcissist, well, you are, just not of large degree, right? Because at some point in time, you're going to make things about you, right? But to that degree on that spectrum, right? At a high degree, that's when it becomes a mental illness or a diagnosis because you can't see others for yourself, right? And then you have sadism, right? The enjoyment or the pleasure of seeing other people harmed or hurt, right? And there's other that I can go into it, but it's about these dark traits of whether you have a high degree, right, or a small degree. To a small degree, it makes you competitive, right? It makes you a man of status and influence and power. It makes you a man of ambition, which usually gets you wealth and money. So when a woman subconsciously sees a man with these traits and degrees, she thinks safety. If he's dangerous, he can protect me as long as he's not a danger to me. So that means that he has to have access to the dark, but the light balances it out so that it's not towards the people that you love, it's towards anybody who tries to harm the people that you love, right? You are a man that knows how to focus on self because a woman doesn't want a man that chases him. So, to a degree, he's narcissistic towards his vision, right? Listen, I don't have time to just be sitting around, kissing you on the forehead, watching Netflix all day. I got a vision to go chase. You feel me? Like, I need you to be a part of this vision as well. So I can take care of us. Because if a man that's focused on chasing his vision, the world chases him. He chases nothing else. A man produces that vision outward because this is where men get the womb of our mind. We get pregnant in the mind. We get an idea and we have to birth that idea and go through the painful process of bringing it into reality. Right. So when she sees a man with that trait, like, okay, he can take care of me. Right. These are the subconscious things that she see when she see a man that considered to be a bad boy or she see that darkness. That's what she's feeling in that, a provider, a protector, right? A leader. And so the idea of masculinity is more so this duality of light and darkness. And so it's more so about, do you have that ability, right, to exist in this duality of light and dark, right? And what happens in modern man and the younger generations right now, right? You got, they call the YNs. The YNs out here is the young that's out here wilding. They got the darkness, but not the light, right? They'll be great protectors, but the way they use their strength, right, is not in an honorable manner, right? Then you got the younger generation that's a little more soft and feminine. They so in touch with their feminine side, but not they masculine. So now they don't know how to problem solve a conflict. They don't know how to become willful, right? They just want to sit down and just do what they feel all day long and don't have the discipline to follow through with a plan. And willfulness allows you to follow through when you don't want to, right? So that's why you have to be a man that can go to war and a man that can also garden and plant seeds.
I love that answer, man. Yeah, I've had many, many conversations on this podcast and privately just about the concept of masculinity and what it means to different people, whether they're male or female. And I think you're the first person I've ever heard start with the intellectual aspect of it. And I think that that's interesting. And the fact you're the first person of all the people I've spoken to who started with that side shows how overlooked that part of it is. I think a
Mm,
lot of people immediately think about the physical capability. People think about protection and provision for sure. People think about courage. People think about confidence, but not a lot of people think it really all starts. It really all starts up there.
mhm,
And the concept about emotional control, because that's so important. I mean, I often say, the easier you are to offend, the easier you are to control. And there are so many people in society. I mean, we truly, truly live in the age of emotionalism, particularly in the Western world, right? So much stuff is about feelings to the point that if a man says he feels like a woman, there's people saying, "Oh, he actually is a woman," right? If he feels that way, then
yeah,
we all, it's not just good enough that he feels that way. No, everybody needs to change their language to accommodate that,
right.
and we need
Warp
to
their
change the
reality
rules.
to his mind.
Yes, yes, everyone must accommodate this. In fact, if you don't, you're some type of hateful bigot, which is, it's insane. But I think it's a good example of just how far the emotional stuff has gone, right? It's just all about feelings. It's not about truth. It's not about anything that's objective. It's just, well, if someone feels this way, then that's his truth, that's her truth, that's their truth, whatever it might be. And I think it's led to a lot of mess in a lot of communities and in a lot of nations, and just in people as a whole.
Yes, sir.
The more people get caught up in the feelings, the more they're becoming mentally ill, the more they're getting depressed, the more they're feeling anxious, the more lonely they are. And yeah, it's a huge problem. And I think that there's been an overall feminization of society. And oftentimes when I say that, I think people don't necessarily understand what I mean, right? They sort of think, oh, are you saying that feminine traits are bad or something like that? It's like, no, but just like masculine traits can manifest in negative ways. And I think most people recognize that. You can also have an over feminization where society is now in danger because everything is just running off of feelings. And you have young men in particular who don't know how to manage their emotions, right? Whether that is sadness, whether that is anger, whether that is disappointment, whatever it is, right? We all feel all sorts of things, but just because you feel something, number one, doesn't mean it's true. And surely it doesn't mean you should act on it, right? If we all just act on our feelings just in the heat of the moment, we see what it leads to. It leads to all sorts of terrible situations. And it also means that people in power can manipulate and control you. If you're that type of person who gets outraged and raged, right, anytime you see or you hear something that kind of hits one of those trigger points, then I don't know, they can just kind of play you like a puppet and just, all right, just feed them some more of that content, put up that headline, and we know what they're going to go and do. And I think that a lot of people don't realize just how much they're being manipulated by all the forms of media that we have. We have the traditional old school legacy media. Now, of course, we also have social media. And man, people really have to guard their brains. Like, I just think there's sort of an assault on people's brains all day, every day. There's a lot of great stuff out there, and I'm grateful for the technology. You and I couldn't do what we're doing right now if the technology did not exist. But there's also a very dangerous edge to it as well.
100%, I agree to that. You know, the feminine is necessary, right? Feminine is what cools us. Um, the feminine is what we call it, right? It gives us our balance in the world, and what we realize is that most people, they think about feminine, they think about women, right? But it's something that exists in all living beings. And so when we think about our art side, our expressive side, our emotional side, right? Our emotions themselves, our ability to emote and feel, that's our feminine, right? We need that 100%. It's what gives us our balance. You feel me? Like when you read the Bushido, it's such an interesting idea because you see some of the greatest samurai warriors, right? They go to war and they go just chopped off 20 heads. Then the next story is about how great they were at gardening, right? Like this was their hobby. When they're at home, master gardener. And they would speak upon it in such intricate detail of interest, right? That was the feminine because they understood the yin yang, the balance, right? And so what happens though is that when you're more of the gardener, right? And less of the warrior, and we're in a wartime, right? Then you're not as useful. And so right now we have a lot of young men today. There's a war and assault on their mind, and they don't know how to fight back, right? The feminine, the crowd mind, the psychology of the crowd is that it is feminine and it's easier to control the emotions of the woman and the child, right? But you can be thinking feminine, which makes your mind similar, right, to that of the woman or the child, particularly when you're overtly following a crowd, right? That's meaning that your mind is feminine. You want strength in these numbers, right, instead of the ability to think for self, because you're looking for comfort away from fear, right? And they use that to control the masses. And so today we need thinking men, right? We need men who know how to critically analyze and think for self, especially in the age of distraction, right? We have a wealth of attention, a wealth of information, but a poverty of attention. Now, that particular quote comes from a man who developed the idea of the attention economy. And this idea that we have so much information, but little time to process. It's unnecessary. We have too much information. And if you're not the type of mind that has the ability to reflect and download and digest, right, these ideas so that you can think for self, then all this information becomes just fast consumption, like fast food, and nothing that you really actually understand. Because understanding is a higher form than even wisdom itself, right? And so we have a generation with little understanding, but a whole lot of information, right? And what this does is it decreases your willfulness as well, right? Because you don't have any depth of knowledge and information that you actually know. So it doesn't become an actual skill set that you can utilize to build a life around, right? So most young men, they come to me and they say, yo, I'm trying to figure out my life. They just get out of college and they're trying to figure out what their purpose is. If you go to something that you pay close up to six figures sometime and you haven't figured out what you want to do by the time you get out, right? That's a scam to me. If somebody if somebody came and paid me $100,000, $60,000, $50,000, this is college's high ticket scams, right? If the person comes out lost, especially if they're not doing something in the field in which they got a degree. And a lot of times these young men go in there, they get a degree for tech and something in tech and then want to go do music. How does that make sense? But hey, hey, I'm telling you, I know I see it all the time. But that's what I'm like. In the computer science degree is actually valuable, but it wasn't your interest. Exactly. So I would rather people live according to their calling. And then some of it is, the beauty of like the Asian culture. They send you to for something to school for something you don't want to do. The reason you followed through with whatever degree you got is because you don't want to shame the family. So
Hmm.
they forced a whole generation to become these data analysts, right? Get into engineering, get into coding, get into tech fields because they knew that these will be the in-demand fields and we can build generational wealth. And now the East Indian has the highest grossing household income in America, right? They're
Hmm.
the top CEOs in all these fields. When they talk about merit versus DEI, well, those are the ones that get chosen for the jobs because they're the most educated, right? So there's something to forcing a generation, right, to develop the skills. Because if you think about in ancient times, you have a son and you're a king. You need him to do what's best for the kingdom, not what's best for himself. That's individualism. So we have so much individualism to where we're not willing to do what's best for the group. We're only willing to do what's best for ourselves, right? Which again, I think is more of a feminine thing as well because you're thinking about how we feel and our values are aligned as a human being is aligned based on what makes you feel or whether you importancize love, significance, contribution, community, right? um and so the way that they're arranged determines how you go about living and making decisions. If you grew up in a household, for instance, and you didn't get enough love, you weren't taught that you were special. You know what I'm saying? That's going to become a void in life, right? To where you're now chasing significance. And sometimes it becomes such a void, you chase significance for the rest of your life, right? And when you chase significance, if you hire somebody who is so focused on significance, when they get around other employees, they're going to want to compete with them, right? Because they need to be better. So we have a culture of people based on ego chasing significance. So everybody's competing with each other, right? Instead of community or contribution, saying that the most significant thing to me is I just need to contribute. I need to be a part of something. So now you all can cooperate with each other in a cooperation to work together, right? That's somebody better because they're going to learn so that they can contribute the most, right? So they can be a part of a community. So that gives them their significance, right? So that order of arrangement matters in the thinking, and it has a lot to do with how you were brought up. right? And if you can change that arrangement within self to make one more important than the other, right? If you're doing something based on love, that's something that will never burn out, right? I do it because I love it and I want to contribute to my community, which will give me my significance. That's a proper arrangement, right? I'm not trying to compete with nobody. I'm trying to add to this thing, right? So we in America have been taught in the Western Hemisphere of thinking, have been demoralized to become individuals, which breaks up the family, which
Mm-hmm.
destroys the institution, which eliminates a chance of power. So now you're no longer a threat. As long as you're an individual, you're not a threat to another empire institution, which is what? Another family. The families that already have the power. Royal bloodlines were created by consistently sustaining information in certain DNA, right? So if you have a son, right, that is intelligent, and I have a daughter that is smart, we starting a bloodline, right? Of that becomes our own brain trust. So now I don't want you to go just talk to anybody. Now she gonna talk to any nigga she done found and fall herself in love with. Oh, you messing up the bloodline. Now I got this because half of this guy that you just chose is going to be in that child. So now you messing up. So the royal bloodline is this idea that they're able to maintain, right, this DNA over time, and information is poured into it because each ancestor gets half of themselves into that child that they're creating, right? And so as long as they're continuing to add minds of intellect and royalty, right, and divinity, then it is a royal bloodline, right, in that sense. But we've lost the art of even thinking that way because through the blood is how you control time, right? So
Mm.
if this blood is continued with this information and this knowledge and these traits and these qualities, right, for the next 500 years, right? Now, these people that exist that are of the rare kind, the elite minds, right? What are these elite minds? System thinkers, people that think about changing the world, think of people that think about being stewards of the planet. People don't like elites. I don't like elites, right? In a certain sense. But when you think about it,
When
the
you say elites, what do you mean by that specifically?
well, I mean people that are the stewards of the planet, right? People that control the decisions on a global level.
Okay.
So think about it like this. Our ancestors were elite. They were elites in the sense that they worried about the planet Earth, the harmony of the planet, right? They worried about living in harmony versus consistent extraction of the planet that will put the ecosystem out of balance. They worried about things of that nature because they said the planet is ours, 196,940,000 square miles. This is our planet, right? It means it's our responsibility to take care of the planet. Then you have some people that there's different levels of consciousness. Localism, right? Where you're only worried about what's going on in your local environment. There's always going to be those thinkers, right? Where they don't care that much. There's rare thinkers on this planet Earth, and we never get into thinking about that. There's always going to be people who dominate in this world because we're not equal at all, right? We have different psychological types, personality types, intelligence types. We have different cybernetics, right? In the way that we think. There's a plethora of differences that make us, even from Myers-Briggs types, right? From introvert to extrovert to ambivert. There's a plethora of customized ways of thinking, people who think in small ways of systems and bigger ways of systems. So when you have somebody that thinks locally, that's somebody that probably most likely would just work a local job, only care about the news cycle in their environment, right? And that is what rules and governs their life. They want something very simple, and that's it. And that's what brings them joy, and that's what brings them happiness. Then you have people that is more into national problems, right? They want to problem solve on a national level. Those are people who often get into government and politics, right? They want to affect the world in some kind of capacity, right? They worry about policy and things of that nature, right? So those are natural leaders and things of that nature. They want to govern over the affairs of others in their environment, and they think about affecting. So it's not survival, right? It's evolution. So then you have people of globalism, right? They worried about planetary things, right? So supply chains, right, which is a completely different thing than the average person. You would ask a person, what would you do with $100 billion? Average person wouldn't know because their ideas are not big enough to do anything with it, right? But if you take a person that is a systems thinker at a high level, right, then they can understand, right, supply chains and a different capacity in water and grains and wheats and how all those systems work in politics, which means they have to have a brain that makes a completely different set of decisions than the person who thinks local. And they have to be adapted to that. Then there's one other way of thinking, which is our ancestors that evolved over time. This is how we evolved through cosmism. Cosmism is understanding cosmic cycles, right? We talk about the age of Aquarius. We're in what we call the solar cycle 25, which every 11 years the sun goes through solar minimums and maximums, meaning that we get what they call the corona mass ejection. If you ever stare at the sun, you see a little black hole in the sun. That is when radiation is exiting the sun and we get solar flares shot to Earth, right? That are periods of more heightened energy. They're usually correlated with technological and social shifts, sometimes conflicts and things of that nature because we have more energy, right? And so let's say that if there was a solar flare that hit, it's not the day that it happens, it's during the times of recovery to where you start to see a shift in the stock market, right? You start to see effects that happen on planets. You look at the ancient Kemetic people, the way they call ancient Kemet because it was the land of the blacks, speaking on the soil. They knew what time to operate in agriculture based on the cycles, right, of the stars, right? And they started to understand the cycles of the planet. So they knew when to plant, when the tides was going to rise, when they was going to come in. That knowledge itself allowed them to be able to then create food and allowed them to be able to build a civilization to have increased population, which allowed them to be able to have the civilization that became so immense. Without that cosmic knowledge, they wouldn't have been able to do that. Today's generation is not connected to anything but the news cycle. So we don't live above man's world. We're living in it, right? When you understand cosmism, which is this consciousness that connects you to the cosmos. Right now, they have this 3.2% chance of this asteroid hitting Earth by 2030. That causes what we call cosmic anxiety, where you have anxiety over things that are beyond your control, right? Cosmic awareness is the opposite of having that awareness of that cycle and knowing what to do because you're prepared in advance. So, hey, you telling me an asteroid is going to hit a certain city in the Eastern Hemisphere? Well, if I now have cosmic awareness of this, which means no other people in time would have had that, right? To pinpoint the exact locations where it could possibly hit and the percentage of um, possibility in which it could happen. So that means I just need to make sure that in the next 5 years, I'm not in that city that it hits. I don't have to worry about it. Cosmic awareness, right? I'm happy for that. Thank you. Oh, you telling me the planet is going to be hotter during this period? Okay, well, let me prepare for that. You telling me there's going to be more conflicts? We're in the end of times, the year of the nine, right? To where one world is going out, new world is coming in. We're in the new phase. So, okay, well, this is how I must respond. I must be more resilient and I must operate in flow, right? We're in this economic nihilism. People don't believe in we believe that the system is rigged by the elites, people who control the supply systems, right? And the power and the assets and the laws that govern us on the planet Earth. Okay, well, let me buy more assets and create parallel networks. Oh, we have decentralization, a revolutionary's dream. I can create my own systems. I don't have to depend on theirs. There's a multitude of solutions depending on your level of awareness. And so there's always going to be some people that have to lead people who think local, right? the people who think national, people who think global, and people who think cosmic. So they fall on a natural different pecking order scale based on the type of thinker that you are. And so if I'm a cosmic thinker, then I want my daughter to be with a cosmic thinker. You know what I'm saying? If I'm a global thinker, I want my daughter to be with a global thinker. You feel me? So that we perpetuate this in a bloodline over time. So my family becomes an institution. You feel me? To where Timbuktu doesn't die when a book is burned. It dies when a man that knows the knowledge is no longer alive, right? Because we always come from a people of oral tradition. So we speak truth because we want to share that truth to the next generation, right? So I think when you talk about the elites, this what we call the managerial class, those who manage the planetary affairs, they have meetings about where do we put these trillions of dollars. They have meetings about energy on the planet, right? AI ethics. You know what I'm saying? When quantum computers get cut on, how do we manage the governing when these fusion machines that China and France is building? Like these are things that they care about, right? Droughts, right? That is happening. How do we deal with tsunamis and earthquakes and extreme weather events? Like the average person don't have time for this. So there has to be somebody who thinks about this because we have a vast population of people to take care of, and it doesn't naturally happen. You have to create sustainable systems, right? But the problem is that a lot of these managerial class are elite capitalists. And so the gap between the wealth becomes larger and larger and larger because they also have those dark traits, right? They don't have those light traits. They don't care about others. They don't govern with righteousness. Right? And so right now, our managerial class of the planet is not righteous. They're selfless or selfish, rather. So this is why we're in an imbalance phase on the planet Earth. And until we have better stewards of the earth, it will stay in an imbalance.
Mhm. Do you think that you've touched on a lot of stuff there? Do you think that that imbalance and that distinction between those you call the elites and then just normal everyday people, and the fact that the higher up the pyramid you go, perhaps the more malicious and dark triad type people you get? Do you think that that's new in any way, or do you just think that's just the way of humanity and we're just living through the latest iteration of that with new technology and new faces and new ways to communicate? But if you look all throughout history, for the most part, all sorts of different nations, in my reading, it seems like that's just the state of humanity. That's generally how it's been. Yes, there have been bright spots. And of course, I'm not saying like all leaders or all people who could be considered elite are inherently evil or something like that. But it just seems like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And we're just kind of going through the 2025 version of things that were happening. I mean, you could go back 500 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, certainly 100 years. And it's just been this way. And empires fall, new people come up, things get corrupted, and we kind of just go through this cycle over and over. And throughout it all, the typical everyday person mostly keeps their head down and just goes whichever way the wind is blowing, or whichever way is not going to get them attacked by their own tribe or the other one.
Yeah, I think what we exist in today is an elite complex system of systems on top of each other. It's never been this complex on the planet Earth. It was always more simple in different times because there was more homogenous groups that were with each other, people of same ethnic backgrounds, right? We often think about diversity, right, as a good thing. And diversity is only a good thing when the people actually understand each other and accept each other. It's not a good thing if they don't because it causes conflict, right? When you don't understand somebody, you consider them to be weird, right? So that's going to always be a conflict. And we're in a time of extreme conflict because you have all these groups who have been forced to accept each other through these ideas and this guise of diversity, but they never actually do. Because you have Christians, you got Muslims, you got Jews, you got Buddhists, you got all these different religions and sects on the planet Earth that are now living right next door to each other, but they don't believe in the same thing. right? You got conservatives, you got non-conservatives, you got extreme left, you got extreme right, you got liberals, you got all these different people who are fighting for their worldview, right? And the world is comprised by ideas, right? Whoever ideas run, that's the current world. Whoever idea dominate. So we're in a time where the ideas that permeate in the average mind, that's the war that we're fighting, right? Every single day, whose ideas get to govern and get to be the most dominant on the planet Earth, right? We have dirty technology that comes at a cost. We're not designing technology that increases, quality of life for human beings. We're designing technology based on fiduciary duties of companies to create more profit, right? And so I don't think that it was always on the planet Earth. Number one, capitalism has not always been on this planet Earth,
How do you
right?
define capitalism? Because you've used that word several times, and I sometimes I'm wondering if maybe we think about it differently.
Well, I think about particularly creating for profit. I think it's just that simple. I think when you're producing just for profit, right, to make money, not for people, right? So, example, when you go to Japan, their society is designed for people, very empathetic design, right? Everywhere you go, it's easy. It's hard to get lost because everything is designed in a way to make sure that the tax dollars of the people are getting spent to increase the quality of life for the people there, right? Um, and when you think about America and you think about quality of life, is very low, very low compared to really, I would say anywhere, right? And I mean it in this capacity, right? Americans are depressed. We're one of the most depressed groups. We have one of the biggest amount of mental illnesses on the planet Earth. We have the largest prison population. We're the most obese, right? We have the most political conflict, maybe not everywhere, right? But the average person, even though Americans are on average more wealthy, right, monetarily wise, but they also have more debt. You know what I'm saying? So the joy level is very low. The younger generation, right, is doing more drugs trying to cope with reality than enjoying it. Right. So when I think about quality of life, I'm talking about the mental quality of life, right? You may have the modern conveniences, but you don't enjoy it. The average millionaire, man, they depressed out here, right? Because they've given up so much of their soul to meet their goals, right? And right now, we don't have a society that's based on values and based on family. You're not going to find a society that does not important size family, right? And these people are going to be happy and joyful. It just won't exist. We keep creating technology for what point? So that people can live better? No, it's so that people can make more money. Apple could probably solve all the problems on the planet if they wanted to. But the problem that they're trying to solve is how to make more profit for my stockholder. It's a fiduciary duty that they have, right? So they create a new iPhone with a new mechanism in it, right? That, I was looking at an advertisement where they got this spray where you can spray on your laptop on the inside so that it can become waterproof. And this has existed for a while. And it will cost them an extra dollar to do that for each laptop. But they don't do it because if you spill something and then you can go to the repair shop, they can get more money out of it. Or you have to replace it. So it's not empathetic design at all. It's not thinking about longevity. They want you to spend more money, right? So now you're prone to accident. You're going to spend more money. Now you have less money to live and do the things that you enjoy. And that's a small, minute example of how the whole entire world is constructed to extract from us and extract from the earth. We're not living in harmony with the earth, right? We're not focused on regeneration, right? We're focused on just extraction, extraction, extraction. So we're not living in a time of flow, right? The average person, man, the average black man, let's just speak on black men. Black men have the highest statistical rate in almost every category that's bad, right? From heart disease to cancer to depression to suicide to incarceration to violence. Like, that's terrible. So There's no progress in that. And when we think about on the planet, you have the wealth gap is increasing by thousands of times. If you go back early, the wealth gap was maybe by, a wealthy man was maybe 10 times wealthier than the average man. Then as time increased 100 times. Now it's like 1,000 times. You're not catching up to Elon Musk, right? And it's not because he's particularly smarter than you. You will never be afforded those opportunities ever, no matter what you've done. I'm not getting a government contract with the Pentagon. It just won't happen. You know what I'm saying? I see. But you think about that, and it's the same, and this is why family is so important, right? Because when you look at Jeff Bezos, you look at Elon Musk, you look at Bill Gates, what they all have in common is Donald Trump, family. So the idea of it is that when you look at the elites, the Elon Musk, the Bill Gates, um, the Donald Trumps, right? The Jeff Bezos of the world, right? Each one of them, number one, was able to go to family for a loan for their startup ideas. But it's not so much the amount of money that they was able to get, but the connections that they was able to get from being a part of these families that allowed them to have an easier pathway to get started, right? And so this is why having a family dynamic and institutions that you come from that have some influence and power is necessary, right? So without these, connections, because even when you go to college for what? You get network, you get a connection. People say, "Oh, I went to Harvard." That's an easier identifier that it gets you to a certain meeting or a certain job, right? So without those type of connections in the world, a lot of people stay at this level because these are classes, right? And people don't want people of the lower class, right, to be in their class. They don't want you in these rooms because they say these rooms are not for you. So this is where you're not going to get certain connections. Now we live in a global world where you can try to skip and bypass that, but it still requires you to be a certain type of thinker to get that. The reality of it is when you come from a wealthy family and background and you have those connections built into it, right? It's not the most brilliant ones of them that succeed. Often it's the most well connected. We have to be like an exceptional to the rule above all in order to get to these higher positions and levels, right? But for them, they can just be a normal inherited and normal heir, you know what I'm saying? And make their way up to a certain point in life. And so the family dynamic in our culture as Black Americans doesn't exist in that sense of having those networks and those connections, at least not yet. And then if we were to try to start from scratch and do it, we still would be integrating into a world we don't own. So the easiest pathway would just create parallel networks, right? To say, well, actually, I don't need this network over here because I can just create my own that gives me the same upward mobility and success. It's kind of like, do you want to boycott or do you want to boycott? Right? Do you want to boycott this company and say, I don't want to shop over here? Or you say, I'm going to shop over here and empower them. That's where I'm putting all my energy because all my interest and my values is already connected to this economy. Right? So we have that choice today. And that's the message that I push out right now is save yourself. Like nobody's coming to save us, but we also don't need nobody to save us because we have everything that we need.
You've said a lot of interesting things there. Something that strikes me as a non-American who doesn't live in the USA and didn't grow up over there is a lot of the last thing you just said there. It comes back to, in my mind, it comes back to what we were talking before about the emotionality. And people want to do, people care more about doing what feels good or feels right or which gets certain sort of social clout, um, more than they care about the actual long-term effects of it, right? So there's a lot of social cachet and a lot of feel-good points and a lot of, righteous anger points from just being that guy, being that gal who's angry and always, boycotting, throwing up the signs, putting up the hashtags, doing the sort of surface level, look at me, look at how angry I am, look at me fighting the system thing, regardless of whether or not that's actually moving the needle in a right direction. And there just seem to be far more people who are stuck in that mindset, and in fact who will denigrate people who are thinking trying to think and promote people to think on a more long-term basis and to think more about ownership and to think more about true self-empowerment, right? um, and that cycle seems to continue. That's something that I watch from a distance. I see it from a distance, and in my mind I see a lot of emotional incontinence going on, and I see a lot of just people not getting out of their feelings and thinking, okay, let's be strategic here and let's really build something. Because in my mind, if someone is, I say this especially to the people who truly, truly think like, the game is rigged, the system is against me. I'm almost like, the more somebody believes in that, like, I'm not even on board with all of these narratives. But I'm like, well, if you truly, truly, truly believe in what you're saying, shouldn't you be the person or the people who are fighting the most for entrepreneurship and for, not in a virtue signaling way, but like actually supporting one another, not just having the slogan, not just having the hashtag, not just wearing the t-shirt, but truly living it. And I just see such a disconnect there. And I see that oftentimes there are individuals who are really trying to push and promote that idea. Um, and they'll get called all the worst names, right? Because and people also want to tribalize it, right? So in the US in particular, one of the issues I see is just people are kind of stuck with the concept of the left and the right and Democrats and Republicans, right? So everyone, there'll be people even listening to you talking right now and they want to know which box to put you in. Are you this one or are you this one? It's just very binary. And I think as long as people are stuck in that mind frame, it also causes problems, because as soon as someone says something, if someone is more on the left, if someone's a Democratic voter, right? And we know most Black Americans who vote are by a large margin. And if someone says something that's like more quote unquote conservative or traditional, right? Even what you were saying about the family, there's people who want to like jump on them and attack them, say, oh, those are Republican talking points, or that's like far right, or that's all sorts of things. And I'm just like, I don't know. I see it from a distance, man. And I'm just like, geez, man, how is progress truly going to be made if every time someone has an idea that doesn't fit within someone's preconceived matrix or what their favorite politicians are saying, you're going to just jump on them and dog them and call them names and try to almost like ostracize them from society? Then not only is progress not going to be made, but to you're always going to be subjected to whoever is in that political party that you think is the better one, right? And you'll be going along with whatever goofy idea that they're pushing and promoting, just because you think, well, that's my party, I can't oppose it. And if the so-called other side says something that is actually good or would be beneficial, people are pre-programmed to think, well, I have to oppose it because, oh, well, that came from the right, or that came from Trump, or a Republican said that, so I'm going to reflexively oppose it, even if it's something that could be beneficial to me, my community, my city, my state, whatever. I just see a lot of that going on, and I don't know. It's just this weird cycle. And some people say I shouldn't speak on it because I'm not an American. I'm like, no, I'm going to say what I think is real. I care about people ultimately, and I want to see people make progress, and I want to see families and individuals flourish. And I don't know. I just see a lot of matrix control going on there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of the game. And there is the onus on the individual person, but the game has always been like that to keep people divided, right? That's the nature of the game, because if you are someone that is of the elite power class, if you will, the last thing you want people to do is to focus on you. That's the last thing you want people to do. The last thing you want people to do is eat the rich. You don't want them protesting in the street saying that you guys create the laws, you create the systems, the institutions, you have control over asset prices, inflation, quality of living, housing, food, right? All these different things. And the people in the street say, you know what? They're the problem. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm just a person. You know what I'm saying? And they're the problem. So if you remove government, if you remove Democrat, Republican, right, and you just say government, it changes the picture of things. Because it's what people complain about, but they're complaining about a side of it instead of the whole thing. When you look at somebody like Elon Musk, what did he did? He created the Doge department. He's an unelected leader, an unelected ruler. That's what a Doge is. Comes from 626 in ancient Venetia that lasted 1100 years. It's from the longest lasting oligarch society in the history of the world, right? And it was an unelected leader that can get things done because there was so much bureaucracy. And America is going through a reconstruction era and period. Over the next 2 years, it's going to be drastic. So if I am someone of the elite class, what has been always the goal is to get you to scapegoat each other, issues, and problems so you never look at the top. Ever. You go back in this country, there's something called Bacon Rebellion. Bacon Rebellion was a time where white farmers, right, and black slaves had started to link up because they realized that it was this wealthy class of people that were making all of their lives bad. You know what I mean? So they were then starting to have alliances, right, to go against the elite class. So what did they do? Something brilliant. They said, wait a minute. They're slaves because they're inferior. But you, my friend, you are a white man. Mm-hmm. So therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to give you some privileges, some jobs, right? Things of that nature. But you can no longer be in alliance with these. So they said, well, sure, I'm a white man then. Let's get this kicking. Let me get some wealth and some opportunity. And the way they justified it in their mind to say, well, you are a slave and you're not supposed to have a better quality of life because you are inferior. So that solves that, right? And so then that created the divide again, right? So now it allowed them to say, I'm a part of this thing called white, right? I'm supposed to live better than you. Because even if you think about the Irish and different people that came over America as prisoners, then all white people didn't come over equally. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them came over as prisoners that was getting dumped by Great Britain over in America. So, but nobody ever asked where your forefathers come from. They asked black people that. You ain't never asked a white man where he from. Why? Because white is enough in America. But me as a melanated American, you ask me where I'm from? I am from here. What do you mean? You know what I'm saying? I have more than enough rights here or right to this place. That's thinking of pride. In America, the class of copper colored people, melanated people, we've been a warrior class. If you look at this history, there's something called the Seminole Wars. The Seminole Wars was in Florida, where there were what they called the Maroons and Freedmen's. And they were given territory after they fought a war, right, to live in this territory and have freedom there. Well, president didn't like that. He sent the troops over there and say, man, let's go take that goddamn territory. We ain't gonna have no free niggas walking around. So during the Seminole Wars, of course, that was a 44-year war. And it's more so just talking about looking at a revisionist way of looking at American history, right? Especially when we talk about slavery time. Because we often talk about it as just these people that was just helpless in chains getting beat. And the reality of it was that there was never a decade, right? Matter of fact, it started off all the way in 1619, there was a rebellion at the beginning of it. Not even 1619, 1555, right? There was a rebellion when they tried to bring the first slaves over here that fought and killed, right? They so-called captors. And so when you think about from inception throughout that few 100-year period in which slavery had lasted, there was always rebellions, there was guerrilla warfare, there was wars, right, that had been waged and fought in the name of those people fighting for their freedom. And many had actually fought for their freedom and gained it. They had went to Mexico, they went to Canada, right? They went to some of the free places. There was free people that lived in that era, and there was warriors. So when I look at my ancestry, I look at a warrior class of people who never stopped fighting, ever, right? When you think about the Seminole Wars, these were literal wars that they fought against the American government. You know what I mean? The American government spent to the tune of, in today's adjusted inflation in dollars, billions of dollars to try to recapture those slaves. And with that last war ending just 4 years before the Civil War, this is part of the reason that they end up having the Civil War, because they spending so much money, right, trying to keep slavery going that it's not even profitable at this point, right? So they're looking at it like, how about you just spend that money and reconstruct America? Like, we could have spent that on ourselves to actually have a better quality of life. That and amongst other things that was happening during that time. So when you look at like an Abraham Lincoln, he never had this consciousness of seeing a free Black person ever. The constitutional writers didn't care about free Black people. Matter of fact, they said that we don't even recognize Black people at all to be free or ever to be citizens of this country, right? They represented the American Indian for sure. You know what I'm saying? That's a different story for a different time as we go down that rabbit hole. But the whole point of it is that when we got out in 1865, the first blood that was shed for this country, it's my ancestral blood. You know what I mean? When it was time for war, we were the first ones to fight, first ones to die, right? But when we got free, what we start doing? Building cities. We built 60 plus towns and cities. What happened to them? America destroyed them, blatantly destroyed them, bombed them. You know what I'm saying? Went in there and flooded some of the towns. Just took the land and seized the land from these people that were focused on building their own parallel political networks and cities. That wasn't asking for nothing. They were just doing for self and doing it successfully. And because of this jealous spirit of people seeing these once enslaved people live so prosperously without them, they destroyed and killed them and found any excuse. Now, America, of course, doesn't want that history to continue to be taught. They don't want it to be taught that we, during the Underground Railroad, wasn't just Harriet Tubman freeing slaves. It was guerrilla warfare. They were fighting battles and they were killing to be free. We was never a coward people. We were never a people that laid down and said, no, I just choose to be a slave. No, we've always been a people with a spirit of rebellion and revolution and that fought in this country. It never stopped. Every decade has produced a great revolutionary in American history, right? And we've produced more revolutionaries than any people throughout history. And it has benefited all people globally. All oppressed people globally have benefited from our revolutionary actions. And that has what shaped America to be the so-called place that it is of diversity and freedom and cooperation, right? And religious respects and things of that nature. It's because of how we fought for people. So, number one, we don't get the just due and respect from the international community based on who we are, how we've been fighting. We've been infiltrated every step along the way. The FBI was created a special task force to watch Marcus Garvey at a time when he was just focusing on entrepreneurship and doing for self. He just got pardoned by Biden. This country has always been focused on how do we make sure that the rise of a Black Messiah never happens, which is just somebody that can organize his people, right, to do for self. Why is that such a threat to America? It's not as if we were building things and we're failing. The Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam built a $500 million network while living. Economic network. He had temples and schools all throughout America, right? He had the greatest reforming and redeeming to clean up a people that's ever been done. Even the black church leaders would say, we don't agree with him, but he does it better than anybody. He had schools, he had barbershops, he had restaurants, he had aviation and trust schools, farms, beef and poultry factories. He had airplanes for distribution and import and export, and even had deals with other countries. You know what I'm saying? Like when they got together in their meetings, they would do their annual readings and they would talk about how many jobs and businesses that were created. That was our idea of progress, ownership, parallel worlds and networks. It wasn't, let's put on a dashiki and be Afrocentric. It wasn't, let's get another civil right to bill passed. It was ownership, right? And so the only reason that failed is because his son took over when he shouldn't have, and he didn't want to continue with the economic platform, which he was co-opted by federal agencies as well. This is documented. It's documented that the CIA spread information about Afrocentricity so that it becomes this idea of cultural expression versus militancy and ownership in Black America. So I need our history to be understood correctly when people think about and speak about us in America, because it ain't never been a time where we ain't been fighting for our position and our way. It's just, it also ain't never been a time where America tried to stop that. Huey P. Newton and the Black Panthers, I just went to go visit Frederica Newton, who was the wife of Huey P. Newton in Oakland, and she was giving me a tour of the Oakland Museum. I was with my brother Jalen Brown, and it was beautiful because they didn't just create, they had a free breakfast program, but they also had 63 other programs that they started. All of these programs were programs to do for self, right? And what happened is the government will come in and stop those programs, and then they would adopt those programs themselves. Now, why would they do that? It's so that you would never be dependent on Black people. You will have to be dependent on the government. Say, wait a minute, you got a free breakfast program? No, we got one. And then we're going to stop yours. Because they never wanted us to have a formed coalition of self-sufficiency, right? So there's no other people that had to deal with that in America. They was able to build middle class because the government gave them middle class, right? And they built suburbans after the Great Depression. We didn't get no subsidies and no help. We just had to build on our own. And anytime we try to build, they try to dismantle. So when you get to present day, 2025, you can't look at it like this generation just messed up, right? When our own government tries to stop us from making progress. And we still never give up. We still keep going. We still keep producing more mightier revolutions and soldiers. And we still have billionaires to this day. And we're still fighting. And even our culture is a psyop in a way that they've co-opted that and taken our music and turned it against us so that we have an attitude that is self-defeatist, that is of criminality, and that is of demoralization.
That's a huge one.
So
that's a huge one.
There's this fight in almost every aspect of who we are. We have to relearn and unlearn. We have to deprogram and reprogram. It is the most complex system ever to keep a people down. The most complex system, the most expensive. When they talk about USAID, yes, USAID is a CIA and 50% fraud in that. But a lot of those psyops that were created in that, a lot of those are what keep us down as well. You know what I mean? All of that money that goes to federal agencies to keep Black people down throughout history. So if we don't teach that history, then how can we ever stop it from happening again? If we gloss over that.
What do you think is the greatest opportunity over the next few years for Black Americans? I'd say Americans in general, but I know you specifically have been talking about the Black American community.
Well,
so if you look over the next few years, what do you think are just like the things that people need to grab?
You know what? Number one, I speak on Black Americans specifically because we are the group that need it the most. So if you're going to talk about solutions and problems, then you talk about the people who need those solutions the most, right?
Fair.
Which would specifically be Black men, right? Then Black women, right? So if you're looking at America and you want to make change in America, there would be no other people you would start with. There will be no other people you would start with. You don't concern yourself with like Elon Musk. You friends with Elon Musk. Elon Musk is somebody who is particularly going to make sure that his people is good. Right? He wants them South African boys in America to make sure that they good. Why is that our concern? It's not. But he's looking out for his own. Because they often try to make it seem like Black people just look out for them. No, we focusing on where the problem is. I'm not looking out for the elite Black people. I'm looking out for those who are suffering and those who have it the worst and those who are in a spiritual and mental condition that doesn't allow them to feel and see, right, the world for what it is, to uplift themselves, right? So when you ask about the opportunities, if we're talking about these opportunities, we're talking about, number one, decentralization, right? I'm a great component or a great proponent of decentralization because it allows you to take the blueprints of our ancestors, to where you take the Elijah Muhammad economic blueprint, which he laid out, right? Then you take like the Huey P programs and you decentralize them, which means that you take them and you modernize them, right? The reason you want to decentralize because we've been messed up so much that we don't trust each other. Decentralization, right, means that you can create trustless systems. So we're now putting these things to smart contracts, right? So now we can do decentralized finance with our own banking. We can do peer-to-peer lending if we want to, right? We can do decentralized education systems, right? We can utilize artificial intelligence, that is our research departments, to help us create our businesses, right? We can say we don't like the music industry. Well, we can complain about that, but Tory Lanez the only person who successfully did it. He created an NFT album and it successfully sold. He ended up getting locked up later on, but nobody picked up that model, right? It's a success blueprint. So if the music industry and Spotify is giving you pennies, less than a penny for your stream and your thoughts, then how about we have a platform called Even Biz? My brother LaRussell is a co-founder in that, right? To where you can go direct to consumer. You don't need their systems. Right now, we're being forced to create our own, which I'm not mad at, right? Because otherwise, it would have taken too long for people to finally get it, right? So we need to go through a same reconstruction period to where we look at organizations that don't work for us historically, let's say the NAACP, right? And other organizations that get heavily funded, but we don't see real progress come from it. So we have to go through a deconstruction and a reconstruction era. We get to self-educate ourselves now, right? Because integration forced us to take an education where the things that I teach people, they didn't learn in school. That's terrible. We didn't learn our own history in school. You got to learn it on YouTube. It's people who done went their whole college career, got master's degrees in history, and I'm telling them something new. And it's because that you are being taught by somebody who's giving you a version of history to create a version of a human being that feels and sees themselves a certain way, right? We need to go to a complete revision of what history is and what education is. We need to be focusing on the sectors to where we can create our own jobs, because if 80% of the jobs will be wiped out by automation, right? The next 80% of jobs that will be created is going to be by the new minds, because 80% of jobs we have now did not exist 80 years ago. So it's okay that they get rid of them, but we have to be prepared for the new opportunities, which is skill set development versus degrees, right? Decentralization and blockchain, so that we can create our own systems, our own digital cities, digital state networks, and then you create physical networks that is directly attached to that. So there are real solutions to this. You can create DAOs if we don't want to take the capitalist corporation model, right? And you have one figurehead leader that decides and distribute all their ideas upon the people, to where the wealth is disproportionately only at the top and the people at the bottom have no say so. Then you utilize decentralized autonomous organizations to where everybody feels like they have a voice in it, right? Then you can create treasuries to where we can decide where we want to put our money. So we can solve food deserts. We can go to the different mayors and governors in the countries and given land so that we can create jobs and opportunities in each one of these states by creating secondary cities and parallel networks, right? There are very real solutions that won't take 100 years. These things can get kicked off in 100 days, right? And so as much as I am a student of history, it's more so I study history to empower me. One of my favorite warriors in history is John Horse. He fought 2 wars. 2 wars. You know how hard it is to survive 2 wars? Loading up muskets and shooting arrows. You know what I'm saying? And then countless battles. He took 200 people across 800 miles to freedom. That's hard to do. Hard to do. And I just think about the resilience that was required to do that. You know what I'm saying? The resilience that he had to have. Who am I to complain in today's time? And I come from a lineage like that. 2 wars, countless battles for your freedom. You thought you had freedom, then they take it away. Then you got to fight again. And then I think about, he must have been a genius. There's a book, Robert F. Kennedy.
I'm not familiar with him. I'm gonna have to look him up. What was his name? You said John Horse?
John Horse.
Like horse, like the animal?
Yes.
Okay.
Then there was a guy by the name of James Small. I believe it was James Small. And I got this book actually from Robert F. Kennedy when I had an interview with him. And it was this brother that would take over aviation ship, Navy ships from the enemy. You know what I mean? And it was so many, like there's countless stories like that we don't make movies of, right? If we did, we would feel and see ourselves differently, right? We would see ourselves in a proper light of where we come from and why we're so resilient as a people today, right? We make 12 years of slaves, but then there's a story of a slave's name was Suri. He came over this country. He was actually stolen, but he was actually of royal blood. He was a prince, right? He ended up spending 40 years as a slave. When he told his slave man, he said, "No, y'all made a mistake. I'm a prince." They laughed at him, and they called him Prince as a nickname because they thought it was funny. But he spoke 5 languages. He went there, and he was a slave in the tobacco fields. He used his knowledge to actually help his slave master turn around his business, right? And improve his business. He was so clever at the time. His story ended up gaining traction, right? The president at the time wanted to use it because of his politics. And then the church wanted to use him because he could speak Arabic to spread Christianity. So he pretended that he gave up Islam, right? And what he really did is that when they was having him writing down prayers in Arabic, he was actually writing down Muslim prayers, right? And so the whole time, when they thought he was spreading Christianity, he was covertly spreading Islam. Right. And when he finally got free, he rolled out his prayer rug, you know what I mean? And he made his shahada and said his prayer. He ended up having a family. His bloodline is throughout Mississippi today. Right. So some people that say, man, we come from kings. Well, some of y'all did. Some of y'all was bloodlines. When you see some of the inventions and innovations in America, some of that is because they took some very intelligent people and they use their knowledge. Because you got to remember these dumb farmers and dumb slave masters, they had no knowledge. They didn't know how to do nothing. So they was taking some of the royal class people and intelligent agriculturalists and things of that nature, herbalists. And that's how these things got into America. This dumb class of slave masters that was brutes that would goddamn practice cannibalism and all sort of torturous things. They weren't intelligent in that sense of inventiveness. No, we had to create and innovate and invent most of the things throughout that period of slavery because it made our lives easier. You know what I'm saying? We created the cotton gin so that it was easier for us to pick cotton. They didn't create it. Why? They had slaves. Why would they? They weren't innovating. We were innovating things because we understood that it would make our lives easier. But think about the intelligence that We didn't even get proper schooling and education, yet we had that knowledge and that ability. So when I think about our people, man, we are more than capable. And this is important for us to go into a bright future, is that we have to remember who we were, because it adjusts our attitude to say, man, we are a resilient, innovative warrior class of people. They just taught me history as if we were just in chains getting our ass beat every goddamn century. They never taught me about the warrior spirit. They taught me Nat Turner because his ended so dramatically that the people end up boiling his flesh and turn him into bags, and they ate him. That's the story they tell, right? Why? Because they want to put trauma, right? So that you never think about doing the same thing. So no, we have to have an attitude, because your attitude creates your disposition towards self, right? And how you see the world, how you feel about self, and what you create in the world. If you come from a royal family, you think you can do anything, right? If my father is rich, then I feel like I'm gonna be rich too. You know what I'm saying? But if your father was poor, then you feel poor. If your father was a loser, you gonna lose. But if you say, no, my peoples was winners, so we're gonna win. It's a place of pride and victory. This is psychologically why everybody always said we should not have victim mentalities. Well, you don't want us to have victim mentalities. Well, teach our victories then.
100%. 19 keys, man. Dude, it's been great to talk to you. And
Yes, sir.
I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom, sharing your time and your ideas. Where can people find and follow you online?
They can find me at 19 Keys on YouTube. And we have a show called High Level Conversations. That one is on the Earn Your Leisure platform. And of course, we teach financial literacy and everything else there. And then, of course, 19_keys on Instagram. And hopefully you find the right TikTok in this 19 keys _. There's a lot of fake TikToks. Be careful. I'm not DMing you, first of all. So just let you know that. I do have books and programs, things of that nature. So if anybody wants to check them out, you can go to 19keys.com.
Awesome. If he's pushing a meme coin, it's not the real one.
No, definitely
19
not.
keys. Thanks for coming on Real Talk with Zuby, man.